Psychologists study the mind and behavior, but how do they actually do this? Let's break down the key research methods in psychology. First of all, experiments. Experiments are the gold standard. This is where psychologists or researchers manipulate one variable and measure its effect on another while keeping everything else constant. For example, does sleep deprivation cause slower reaction times? This experiment might include one group of participants that sleep normally and another group of participants that are kept awake for longer. The researchers would then measure their reaction times the following day and compare the results. This is called a true experimental design. Participants are randomly allocated to the groups or conditions. Random allocation makes sure that there is no bias in the way that participants are allocated. For example, it wouldn't be a fair comparison if one of these groups just happened to be mostly made up of elderly adults. That would mean that the difference in the reaction times between the groups could be explained by other variables that weren't controlled for. Importantly, true experimental designs allow researchers to make cause and effect conclusions. Next, correlational studies. Sometimes, either for ethical or practical reasons, you can't do an experiment, like testing whether childhood trauma affects adult well-being. So psychologists might look for relationships instead. A correlational study, for example, might find that higher screen time is linked with lower sleep quality. But remember, correlation does not equal causation. It shows patterns or relationships, but not necessarily causes. Number 3, surveys and questionnaires. These are quick, efficient, and easy to administer. Psychologists use surveys to measure attitudes, behavior, or mental health symptoms. They're great for big samples, but unfortunately depend on participants being honest and accurate. Number 4, observational studies. Here, the researcher simply watches and records behavior. This can be a naturalistic observation, for example, observing children on a playground, or a laboratory observation, such as observing toddlers in a controlled room. An advantage of an observational study is that it allows people to behave more naturally, but an obvious disadvantage is that researchers can't control the environment. Number 5, case studies. Case studies involve a deep dive into one individual or a very small group. They're used in rare or unusual situations, like studying someone with a unique brain injury. Case studies provide rich detail, but it's hard to generalize the findings to everyone. However, they can be useful for generating new research questions and ideas, which the researchers might then do an experiment on. Number 6, longitudinal and cross-sectional designs. There are 2 common ways that psychologists study change over time. First of all, longitudinal. This involves following the same group for years. The next is cross-sectional. This involves studying different age groups at the same point in time. Longitudinal studies show how people truly change, but they take a lot of time, as you might have guessed. Cross-sectional studies, however, are faster, but they can't track individual development. Finally, focus groups. Focus groups involve bringing a small group of people together to discuss a topic in depth. A facilitator asks questions, encourages conversation, and observes themes that emerge. They're great for understanding attitudes, motivations, and experiences, especially when you want rich, detailed insights that surveys just can't quite capture. But keep in mind, group dynamics can influence what people say, so the results are more exploratory than definitive. And that is the toolkit of psychological research. Each method has strengths and also helps us understand human behavior from a different angle.